Hi, so this is lesson 4 of this series. This lesson is called Lowland Landscapes in the UK, as opposed to upland landscapes, which we looked at last time. Essentially, this means areas that are lower in altitude than the upland areas we learnt about. The reason we're not learning about flatland as such is because flatland would be quite boring and there aren't really any features. And flatland is largely formed from deposition of sediment from rivers. There's not much more to say about it, so that's why we're going to look at lowland landscapes in the southeast. Please now pause the video, write the title and copy down those 4 keywords with definitions on the right. Okay, if you could now write down the correct or most appropriate answer. This is your Connect quiz that's testing you on what we did in the previous lesson. And here are your answers. I've taken the video off for the purpose of this one because I don't want you to get distracted from the beauty and the splendor of this incredible place. We're learning about the Weald, which is in southeast England. It's actually about 10 miles south of where we are in South London. It's also known as the North Downs and the South Downs. Just take a look at that and just enjoy looking at that wonderful picture. If you were standing there and looking out there, what kind of things might you ask? What kind of questions might you ask about this landscape? So this map you're seeing here shows the distribution of limestone and chalk, but we want to focus specifically on chalk. So what I'd like us to do is to pause, and I want us to consider a trend, an example, and an anomaly. So look carefully at this map and ask yourself, where is what's the overall pattern? What's the overall distribution of chalk? Can you give an example? And then lastly, what doesn't fit? Is chalk perhaps in somewhere that doesn't fit the original pattern? So with that in mind, I'd like us for 3 marks to describe the distribution. Describe just means say what you see. It's that simple. Distribution, again, means where things are. And we're focusing just on chalk. So in order to get the 3 marks there, we can do TEA with this. Okay. Please write the question, pause the video, and then use this map to try and do that. Okay, so the answer that we've got is the main trend is that chalk is located or distributed in southeast England. It wasn't good enough just to say southern England because it's really concentrated towards the southeast. What you could say is that it stretches in a line from the east coast to the south coast. If you remember looking at that map, that it was stretching in a kind of like a diagonal line from the east coast down to the south coast, and then London was about here. Okay, if you remember that from the map. And then the anomaly, we also found that there was some chalk on the northeast coast in Yorkshire. If you knew that Yorkshire was there, that's fine. It's not a problem if you didn't. The important bit is that it was the northeast coast. If you want to go back and have a look at that map again, please do so now. Okay, we've got a quick quiz for you here. We've got 4 different types of rock, and I'd like you to look at them carefully and write down whether they are permeable or impermeable. So write in your books on a piece of paper or in Microsoft Word, A, is it permeable or impermeable, B, and so on through C to D. Okay, the answers. Chalk was permeable. Remember that permeable means it allows water through cracks in the rock. Limestone, also another sedimentary rock, is permeable. Then granite is impermeable, and that's why we have ribbon lakes and misfit streams, misfit rivers in the Lake District. Lastly, London clay, which we're learning about today, as well as chalk, is actually impermeable, and this is why so much clay is found on the bottom of a river bed, because the water cannot soak through it. We're now going to consider two different types of weathering that are quite different from freeze-thaw weathering, which happens in the Lake District. The first one, as you can see, is biological weathering. That's when trees and plants with roots, they expand the cracks in rocks in search of nutrients, and therefore the cracks get bigger. And quite literally, the tree roots break apart the rock. This is a slow process. It happens over time, and it happens where soils are thicker, where there's more vegetation, there's more plant life and trees as well. We tend to get biological weathering happening more in the southern part of England, but again, it's a really slow process. So just to recap, biological weathering is when tree roots expand the cracks in rocks in search of water and nutrients, and therefore over time the rock breaks apart. The second type of weathering is called chemical weathering. Now this is when slightly acidic rainwater, dissolves the softer rocks, sedimentary rocks such as chalk. It even dissolves limestone over time. Again, this is a very slow process that happens over a course of many years. In the last slide, there was a link to a short video that is included in the description of this lesson below this film. If you want to click on that, it's a short introduction to how the Weald was formed, but I'm going to explain it to you as best I can now. So 60 million years ago, the Earth's climate was a lot warmer, and southern England was covered in a layer of shallow sea. And a layer of chalk was laid down on top of a layer of clay as sediment was deposited, and it got compacted layer upon layer over time. Okay. What happened after that for the following few million years is that we had tectonic uplift, and that was where the movement of the Earth's crust caused convection currents in the Earth's mantle. If you remember these from paper 1. This caused this layer of rock to be lifted up to become like a dome shape over time. Okay. So this was tectonic uplift, where this layer of clay and chalk was lifted up. What I'd like us to do now is to draw a simple sketch showing how the layer of chalk sits upon this layer of clay. Now this was 60 million years ago when these layers were formed. Then the next part is when we had this tectonic uplift pushing the land upwards to create this kind of dome shape. Then the third thing is where the weathering comes in. So what happened is that this layer of exposed chalk, the very kind of top of the dome, this became weathered and eroded by wind and also by water. This became eroded, and we ended up with this incredible kind of shape here. And what we're going to be focusing on in this lesson is not so much the tectonic uplift, or that's the start of the story. We're going to focus on this kind of area here. So just copy that neatly into your books, please. So as I said previously, we're going to be focusing really on this particular part here, and that will become clearer in a moment. So I just want to point out that this is actually it's a huge area, okay? It's not like a U-shaped valley where you can see from one side to the other. I've just kind of taken a mirror image of this layer of chalk here and the clay valley, which is called the Clay Vale. This is actually in reality about 60 miles. If you go this way, you end up in London. And if you go this way, you end up in the sea eventually, and you end up getting towards Brighton, looking south, okay? It's a huge area. And you can see it again here. Now what's interesting is, so this area down here, this is the clay. Let me do it in white so you can see it nice and clearly. This is the clay area beneath. This used to be covered in chalk, but it's been weathered and eroded. Here is the chalk. Now if you ever drive south on the M25, you'll be driving towards Croydon, and then suddenly you see these imposing, what we call escarpments, and they're kind of white cliffs that are kind of ascending just to the side of the motorway. And that's exactly what this is here. This is an interesting diagram that kind of shows the photo we've just been looking at. This, however, is probably a bit more complicated than we need. The important thing to recognize is that here's the chalk, here's the clay, and this area here is called the clay Vale, which sounds a bit like valley. Okay, and it's this bit here. You've then got this thing here, this is the scarp slope, that's the steep slope, and then you've got this bit here called the dip slope. And then the last thing I want to point out is a spring line settlement. So look, here's how it works. What happens is rain, water, and rivers can flow through chalk because chalk is permeable. But eventually, when it meets this layer of clay, it can't go through it because clay is impermeable. So what you find at the bottom of this cliff, and this kind of cliff is a scarp slope, but it's also another name for it is escarpment. What you find at the bottom of this cliff is you find springs that come out of the ground. Then they form streams, and then they form rivers. So if you go down to the South Downs near Croydon, on top of the hills there are no rivers, but at the bottom in the valley you find all these rivers and streams. And this is where all these settlements or villages and houses have sprung up, okay, because they needed the water. So I'd like you to test yourself now. So what I'd like you to do is write down numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Study this amazing picture, and I want to see if you can match up the numbers with the keywords in the box. So the answers are: 1 was the clay vale, the clay valley. 2 is the dip slope, which is called a dip slope because it's not very steep, it's just a slight dip. 3 was the spring line settlements. Hopefully you should be able to see these houses here. Okay. Then the last one was the chalk escarpment, the scarp slope, the chalk escarpment. Next thing I'd like you to do is to copy neatly this diagram. I'm not going to walk you through it step by step because we're using it in a slightly different way. I'd like you to just draw this really carefully. Ensure, please, that you write down processes and features of a lowland landscape. Now, what I haven't done is indicated which are processes, which are things that are happening, and which are features, things that you can see. Okay, we're going to challenge ourselves now. I'm going to walk you through a 4-mark question, and we're going to take the process and feature approach to physical geography. So what we need to do first off on our diagram, there's one thing that we missed out on the previous slide, and that is that this area of rock is clay. I know it says that this is clay vale here, but that is formed as a result of weathering. Okay. First off, what we have to do is identify what is a process and what is a feature. If you remember, a process is something that is happening, whereas a feature is something that you can see. So first off, we're going to look at the processes. Well, the process, the first one was tectonic uplift. The second process was biological weathering. And then the features created a chalk escarpment and a clay vale. So what we need to do, this question is a 4-mark question. We've got to take it like we're telling a story, okay? We need to tell it, and it's a detailed explanation. And what it means is, how was a lowland landscape made or formed? Obviously, the first thing we need to do is say what this landscape is, and it was called the Weald. So what I'm going to do is give you the first mark, the first mark of the 4, and then we need to ensure we're using processes and features. Processes and features from our diagram. There's the first mark. Write the question, pause the video, and see if you can do the next 3. Please now get out your green pens and correct your answers. So the second mark should be tectonic uplift has pushed up the land, or it has formed a dome of this area of chalk and clay. So we've got process, we've got feature. Next up, we need another process, and I'm sorry the video was hidden the last word there, but it should say the clay has been weathered away by biological weathering. Then finally, the fourth mark is what are the next features? Leaving behind a clay veil and a chalk escarpment. So give yourself a mark out of 4 and be honest and harsh with yourself, okay? And ensure that you correct your answer. All right, what I'd like us to do now, this kind of ties together what we did last lesson. I would like you, based on what we've just done, to do exactly the same, but for the upland landscape, which was the Lake District. So I'd like you to do exactly the same and see if you can do that. One thing you could add that we didn't add earlier is that this is an area of igneous rock and it is mainly granite. So if the first mark is saying where this landscape is and what it's made from, that's going to be your clue there. Pause the video and see if you can answer this in the same way. Here's the answer. We wanted to say Lake District is an area of igneous rock in northwest England. Glaciers have eroded the landscape to form U-shaped valleys. You will notice that I didn't include glaciers on here. And obviously that was the feature that has eroded the landscape. The only reason I didn't include it is because the glaciers have disappeared and they're no longer there. You could have perhaps just kind of added it in something like that if you wanted to. The third mark, freeze-thaw weathering has caused rock falls. So again, we've got a process, and rock falls is I guess a process, and then we have the last final feature has created scree slopes. Give yourself a mark out of 4 and see if you can correct that. To finish this lesson off, I'd like you to do the quiz here. Just write the answers to this. There's not a choice of answers, just write the answers. And then I'd also like you, and this is going to be really good for this final section, I'd like you to copy out the table there that is a really nice comparison of the Lake District and the Weald. Do it from memory if you can, okay? Try and do it from memory, and then I'll show you the correct answers in a moment. Okay, answers here. Number 1, chalk. Clay is impermeable. Number 2. 3, biological weathering. 4, tectonic uplift. And 5, U-shaped valleys. Now the table, please green pen your responses here. So next lesson is lesson 5, and we're going to be looking at how humans affect the landscape. It's a lot easier than the last 2 lessons, so thank you for your patience in working through this. Ensure you upload the work to Teams or email it to me or Miss Edmonds. Best of luck. Thank you.